bag throughout the whole show. That longevity.
All right. Well, welcome to the No Show. My name's Andrea Edwards.
My name's Tim Wade.
And I'm Joe Augustine, and welcome to a show that tries to basically break you out of the echo chamber you might be in and take you into the world that you may not be aware is happening around you.
Yeah.
And from all over the world today, by the way. So hi from Australia.
I'm in Singapore.
Australia. And I'm in Thailand. And unfortunately, we've lost our special guest for today, who was in Bangladesh. But it's just three of us, which is always great. And Joe, for the first time, I think we've got better sound and vision than you, because you're in an apartment somewhere in the Gold Coast. Is that right?
Yep, I'm in the Gold Coast. Apologies about the lack of the studio environment. I brought a little microphone with me, but I don't think it's worked out as well as I planned.
No,
It's okay. It's fine. It makes my setup look fantastic for the first time ever.
Exactly. Tim, you haven't been able to join us all that much lately, so tell us what have you been up to?
Well, this semester, so I'm at Trinity still, so the theological college. So the workload's fairly intense. I mean, today I've just been reading about neo-orthodoxy, and
my favorite topic.
Pardon?
My favorite topic.
Yeah, well, I thought it was about how the Matrix is awesome, but it's not about that at all. So so I got an exam on Monday. So it's been kind of like pretty full on with that particular schedule. And then the last couple of weeks I was over in China, which was fantastic. Well, a week and a bit ago. So it's been pretty busy, but it's always good, and it's nice to be back.
Yeah, it's good to have you back. And we've got someone here from New Zealand. Hello. Good to have you here. Can't see who you are, so I'll see it later. All right, should we get stuck in?
Why not? Here we go.
Let's do it.
All right, so we're going to go through the quick takes first. So the first is, of course, we kicked off the week with Putin winning a landslide victory in Russia, but of course there was no other possible outcome to that election. I did find the protests interesting. It seems to be brewing, so I hope those people have the courage to keep going. Joe?
Well, in California, they're going through a massive prison reform program, which is, well, it's been received quite well. There's one strange exception to the reform program, which is those people on death row. But it makes it for interesting read. If you're on BBC.com, look out for this article. It talks about the situation in San Quentin and how people, when they're going to visit their people or visit friends who may be, on death row, what they had to go through and what they had to go past, crazily enough. But yeah, so interesting things for them there.
Yeah.
There was an article in Sky News about, from a climate change perspective, climate news perspective, about homes being swallowed up by the sea as the rate of coastal erosion accelerates. And this is happening all around the world, with countries like UK saying 21 villages and hamlets in England, so this is not just like 21 tiny places, they're fairly sizable, will lose more than £500 million worth of residential property due to coastal erosion by the end of this century, which is 76 years away. So over the course of this time, basically houses and villages and settlements are just falling into the sea.
Yeah. And I think 2100 is incredibly conservative based on what we see going on. I saw another article there. What's his name? One of the British politicians is planning on building these enormous housing estates in Cambridge. And Cambridge is actually one of the towns at risk of going under. So I thought that was really interesting. A bizarre story. A man in Melbourne has died after falling from a hot air balloon, and it looks like it was suicide. So I can only imagine how horrendous that must have been for the fellow passengers, as well as the people on the ground where his body fell.
Yep. Greenpeace could be thrown out of a UN deep sea mining body after a mining company claimed activists disrupted a research expedition when they boarded the vessel. Boarded a vessel in the remote Pacific. I'm tempted to go and join them.
Yeah, you should, Joe.
Czech Republic is in crisis as it struggled to contain a surge of whooping cough. I had to say whooping cough like that as a shout out to, I think, Family Guy or something like that. But whooping cough is no laughing matter. It is pretty alarming, and it's not the first country to experience it. That article again from BBC.com.
Yeah, so Japan's sorry, famous cherry trees are blossoming earlier due to climate change. And I don't know if you know the story. The records for the cherry trees go back hundreds of years. So it's one of the climate measures that has been very, very long term. So the average date at which they start to bloom has moved up 1.2 days per decade since 1953. And Tokyo's cherry blossoms this year will start blooming on March the 21st, which was yesterday.
Wow. I think we should stop climate change as soon as the cherry blossoms get to school holidays. Then we should stop the climate change so that we can all go and see them.
Nice.
Well, speaking of temperatures, heat extremes are happening around the world. Brazil this week recording for the second day in a row, and this is not a misprint, by the way. Temperatures above 60 degrees Celsius. In Sudan, everything is closed down as it prepares for 45-degree heat waves expected in the last 2 weeks. And good luck to everyone, especially as none will have the ability to cool themselves with air conditioning. So
that's crazy. 60 degrees.
Yeah, that's
kind of crazy. That 60 degrees is actually just about nice enough to kind of pasteurize your eggs. So I'm a little bit.
Oh.
I'm really, really surprised by that.
Yeah, so it's a wet bulb temperature, and the Sudan temperature is an actual temperature. So I'm not sure what the wet bulb will be for Sudan, but 45 degrees is going to be excruciating.
Right. So this number 60 degrees is a wet bulb number. Then it's not the. Okay. Great.
Actual.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
That's my understanding of it. If someone else knows differently, tell me if I'm wrong.
Well, Kate Middleton probably doesn't know differently. She's at the moment currently being devastated by photo furor, and we can't ignore those shenanigans. But she may discuss what went on health-wise. But sometimes I just feel like our obsession with the royals it's harmful to people. I mean, I guess if you're, some people go, well, boo-hoo, you're a royal, but at the same time, she's a person. Can't we just leave her alone? And, but I mean, yeah, I don't have much more to say about it, but that's on the dailybeast.com if you want to go and check it out.
Right.
Yeah.
I think we should be a little bit more indifferent about it, actually. There's an interesting story here about about noodles, instant noodles. Instant noodles were obviously invented to make things very convenient for the Japanese workforce, because in terms of being able to have a quick meal, nothing faster than just throwing some hot water into a cup with the noodles and you're done. But it also has become, of course, over the years, a very convenient source of calories, very, very cheap source of, I would say, not so healthy calories, but it's very quick and fast. And there is this piece in CNA that talks about how now instant noodles have become an economic red flag, in the sense that when you see it happening a lot in particular groups or certain societies, it really shows you that it's a sign of it's a sign of a lower strata kind of emerging. So like in U.S. prisons, for instance, we used to hear all about trading cigarettes, right? But now it's noodles. So noodles are becoming a currency for the prisons, and around the world as well. As prices are going up, I guess when you're not having cereals for lunch and dinner, you might be doing instant noodles, which arguably is a little bit more delicious, but not very much more nutritious.
Yeah, I've been doing a fair bit of research into the impact of the food that we have in my middle class dream series, and so in these noodles, and I find this really fascinating because men's underpants and women's and lipstick are two economic indicators, right? And so it was interesting to see the noodles coming up as another one. So it's an indication that things aren't going well. But when you understand sort of the chemicals in the food, things like MSG, of course, but also the microplastics leaching into the food because they're in a plastic container with a plastic lid, and you chuck it in the microwave or put boiling water on it. But millions and millions of people around the world, that's how they can eat. But even if they were eating cereal, that's also got stuff in it that's not good for us either. So yeah.
Well, you can't just say men's underpants are an economic indicator without elaborating a little bit more about that. So let's take you back there as well.
Yeah, right. So when there's a reduction in purchasing power of men's underpants, it's a sign of the economy changing direction and going not in the right direction. It's the same for women's lipstick. So women's lipstick, obviously during the pandemic, people were out less, they bought less lipstick. And so that became an economic indicator at the time. Right. So I thought it was interesting. But men's underpants, I'm surprised you haven't heard about that.
Men's underpants would have gone up during COVID because everyone was just only wearing that during their Zoom call.
Yeah, right.
I've only ever bought a batch of underwear once. It was 20 years ago, and the rest of them are still hanging on right now.
Yeah.
By a thread.
Yeah.
There were boxes.
I'm gonna give my camera a bit of a wipe as well. See whether this makes me look any less fuzzy.
Okay.
Sorry for that. There you go.
That was with an old pair of underpants.
There you go. The one I'm wearing right now. It's a real stretch.
Yeah. No, there's lots of different there's lots of different indicators, and men's underpants and things like socks as well. They're part of the.
Yeah.
All right. So a really, really interesting piece in Media Matters titled "How Broadcast TV Networks Covered Climate Change in 2023," and it starts that sort of talking about the fact that 2023 was the hottest year on record, and it was not even close to previous records. Testifying to this calamitous milestone were record-breaking extreme weather events and a record number of billion-dollar disasters. This is obviously just talking about the US, from searing heat waves to droughts, torrential rains to raging wildfires and plumes of smoke. Despite this, media networks like the ABC, CBS, NBC and Fox scaled back their climate coverage by 25%. And that's a marked decrease from the 2 years before where improvements were, they consider had been made. So some other findings: corporate broadcast TV. So if you ever visit a corporate office, you'll see they've got TVs in their offices. They featured less than 1% of their coverage on climate change. And another point, for at least the 7th year in a row, white men dominated the demographics of guests featured on climate segments. So 52% of guests on morning news, evening news, and Sunday morning political programs were white men. Women only were 30% of the guests, and women of colour were 10%. Now, for all sorts of reasons, women are the people most impacted by all of these disasters, but we still don't have a voice at the table, and we don't have a voice in the media, and I think this is a really dangerous exclusion, and the media need to sort it out. Solutions or actions that may be taken in response to climate change were mentioned in 22% of climate segments, which is, this is the action bit is the hope bit. So talking about what we can do and how we can do it is important. And then the final point, discussions of climate justice, which focuses on the disproportionate effect of climate change on socially marginalised communities and the need for equitable solutions in addressing global warming, were mostly lacking from TV news. Only 5% of coverage, and the year before it was 3% of coverage. So there's a lot of big misses going on in the media in many ways, but I thought that was quite alarming considering the year that we've just had and the news that's coming out about that year, which I'll talk about when I do a couple more pieces later.
So I think it's important to note as well that this is it's not an opinion, but actually the data. It's actually about what is the state of affairs. It is what is, despite what's happening. So it's not one of those things where we just think it should be more. It really is just a state of the numbers that are out there.
Yeah. Well, it's not looking good in Haiti at the moment, a country that's consumed by violence, and of course, that's where the most vulnerable suffer. UNICEF's executive director, Catherine Russell, has called the situation in Haiti horrific and likened the lawlessness to the post-apocalyptic film Mad Max. Certainly, the latest violence in Port-au-Prince is a reminder, if anyone needed, that Haiti remains closer to anarchy than stability. For pregnant women, the situation is dire, and both women and babies are dying from preventable issues. Today, Haiti is seen as a failed state. It's experienced months of turmoil and political instability following the murder of President Jovenel Moise in July 2021, which has culminated in the current state of extreme gang violence. The fighting has already claimed many thousands of victims, from those whose bodies lie strewn in the streets to others forced from their homes and living wherever they can to be safe. There are 360,000 internally displaced people in Haiti. Helicopter flights bringing aid in from the Dominican Republic have begun to arrive. But with the airport in Port-au-Prince and the port both still closed, not enough can get through for those people in need. So people are starving. The political impasse, which has followed the resignation of Prime Minister Ariel Henry, continues. Haitians are constantly told that a US-backed transitional council comprised of 7 members is close to becoming a reality, but the interim administration has still not taken power or brought about any kind of stability on the ground in Haiti. The longer the power vacuum continues, the more the security situation descends into anarchy. It leaves millions caught in the perfect storm of politics, violence, homelessness, and hunger. It's a pretty dire situation there.
Yeah. There's a town in the north of Haiti, I can't remember what its name is, but apparently they fought off the gangs and they've become quite stable. So if anyone is actually able to get there, especially the pregnant women and the small children, they can be helped. But a lot of malnourishment in the children. It's just terrible. It's just terrible what's happening there.
You know, what's interesting is it a sort of a periscope into a future of resourcelessness and gang and where society could descend if we don't get things right?
Yeah, and I think that's the learning.
Yep.
Yeah. Anyway, it's very sad, and there's some other situations around the world that are equally devastating, but Haiti is it's horrible. Just a quick one. Banksy was back in the news this week following a new work that appears to paint leaves onto a large tree. The artwork covers the wall of a 4-story building and shows a small figure holding a pressure hose beside a large cherry tree. This tree had been chopped back and it's called pollarding. It was the first time I'd seen that word. I'm sure it's not actually the first time, but it's the first time it's sort of registered. Anyway, that's when they prune the tree back. So it was first spotted in Finsbury Park in East London. And all of the early media coverage was around, was it a Banksy piece? And of course, until he or she put it up on their social media channels, we didn't know, but it was confirmed to be Banksy. And then after that, the conversation was centered around whether or not Banksy is making an environmental or climate emergency statement. Anyway, people are talking about it, and obviously Finsbury Park are loving it. So it's a nice little piece of news.
Yeah. Well, there's a different kind of story about leaves. Not a very good one. This is about floods, wildfires, hurricanes, all that kind of stuff. I know it's a very tenuous link I tried to make with that one. But you always hear about insurance and the challenges about insurance. Well, the world is coming to a point right now where insurance is increasingly difficult to get. And for a number of reasons. One is, first of all, the likelihood of fires and disasters. Things that used to be a 1 in 100 years event are happening, on a more regular basis. In Queensland here, where last year they had some terrible floods. All these things which people normally wouldn't have for a very long time are happening on a more regular basis. So what's happening in the US, especially in California, is a bit of a problem, because what has happened is the risk of all these events has gone up. And insurance is actually a very natural thing. What they do is they calculate the risk, they price the risk, and they offer it to you as something that you can insure yourself against. You can mitigate for the risk. But while there've been increased risks for everyone to bear, they've also had a simultaneous thing where what they're trying to do is contain the cost. So legislation actually is saying that they can't increase the cost of insurance, but the caps that they've put on people being able to increase on the premiums on insurance can't keep up with the risk. So unfortunately, what happens is private insurance can't offer a fair insurance policy, fair from their perspective as a business, so that people can take it up. So the government then has to step in. And what we're looking at, or what the US anyway is looking at, is a situation where the insurer, I would say the default insurer, which becomes the state in the end, could be facing a severe financial crisis because the risks are high. Private insurance can't provide the kind of support that it would to the market. And if there's some big calamities, basically, it's very likely that these local governments, these regional governments, will probably default on the insurance. So it's quite a tenuous time for them. They have increased risks, and they have an insurance policy by an insurer, the government, the local governments, that may not be able to pay up if the big thing happens. So that's the story that they've got. And if you want to find out more about that, you can chase down Amapo and Company on YouTube. There's an interesting piece they did on that.
One of the things that they talked about in that interview, I found it really fascinating, was that basically insurance is the core of the financial industry, which that was the first time I'd really sort of heard that mentioned. I mean, I'm putting you on the spot here, Joe, but can you explain why that matters so much?
Okay, well, what insurance is essentially is this: the actuaries, the people who are, someone with a speech impediment might say, actually, the problem is, actuary is about looking at all the statistics. So there's a 1 in 10 chance that this will happen. There's a 1 in 15 chance that this will happen. It's a 5% chance that this will happen, right? So what you do is you buy insurance against it, so that in the worst case of scenarios, you don't have to face the full brunt of it. Now, so the insurance is a business where all the risk is taken on and is diversified, and it makes it possible so that if something happens to you, your business continues. So if you think about the infrastructure around you, for instance, your home, your life, and if you're running a business, all these things are going to come to a complete stop if something calamitous happens and you don't have insurance. So that's why insurance actually makes for business continuity. If you have insurance in place, if there's a fire, there's a chance for a rebuild because you have the means to do it. It may take some time, but you have the means to do it. But if you're not insured, then that really is the end of it, because as you well know, in life, as you struggle, as you move forward and you amass some money or some capital, it takes all that time and the opportunity that you had along the way as well. So insurance is basically a way to lock in some of that. It's not to completely take it in, but to lock in some of that so you can basically have some traction on your present circumstance if something terrible were to happen. I hope that kind of helps.
Yeah, and they were talking about, like, if you can't insure a property, you can't live in a property, or you can't buy a property unless you've got the money to pay for it. Or you can't get a mortgage on a property if you can't insure a property, right? And obviously, America, just like many other countries, is experiencing housing shortages, so it's going to ripple over into that too. So the ripple effects of it. It's really quite a massive issue. And, I was reading the other day, so Florida and California have both had major insurance companies move out. Oregon's now been put on a high risk list because of fires. So parts of the US which weren't in that category are starting to move into that category. So I think being aware of it, and if you've got a property in a place that's at risk, it's probably a good time to get out if people are stupid enough to buy it now. Have you seen the East Coast up near Maine? Have you seen the flooding that's been going on with high tides? And they built these group of people spent $500,000 on a sandbank, and it was almost instantly washed away. So like this, we can't escape this. The water is coming.
Well, there's some people who are doing it now this way. They go in with their eyes wide open, and they realize that when they buy a property, especially if it's in a wooded area somewhere out in the country, that they're looking at a complete loss. That's the kind of calculation that they have, and some people are prepared to do that. They think it's a worthwhile way to live because it's slightly less expensive in terms of an investment, and they like the lifestyle. And they're prepared to roll the dice with it. So you're right. For people who need to take a mortgage and stuff like that, no insurance or the inability to insure is certainly it really is going to stop those who need it the most from being able to get the financing they need.
Yeah.
So invest in noodle shares and underpants, maybe.
No, underpants is when
that goes the other way.
It's either good or bad. Yeah, but yeah. You don't want to invest in underpants if the economy is going down.
Yeah.
All right. So an important article in nature.com, I shared this on LinkedIn the other day. So Gavin Schmidt, who is the director of NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies, published an article this week saying that with all the data available, climate scientists cannot fully account for 2023's heat anomaly. This is one of those stories that should be in the headlines everywhere, but of course it's not. As we know, media coverage on the climate crisis has reduced. But so last year, average land and sea surface temperatures have overshot previous records each month by up to 0.2 degrees Celsius, which doesn't sound like much, but this is a huge margin when you look at it from a planetary scale. And there's a lot of reasons cited, and if you're paying attention to this, obviously it's the impact of greenhouse gas emissions, El Nino, which is apparently now on the way out, sulfate reduction, especially in the shipping lanes in the north, the Hongo Tonga volcano eruption, but none, even when combined, account for the anomaly. So it's leaving scientists fairly stumped. And I think it's a really important piece of writing from one of the top climate scientists in the world. Basically, what he said is we just don't know. But we do know is we need more data and we need to do our work faster. So, so much of the climate research that we read is already old. There was an article on, I think it was on life forms in the ocean off California, and it was talking about a heat blob event that happened in 2013 to 2014. And now we're looking at what's happening in the ocean now, which is so much more extreme than back then. But that's the information that we're referencing. So, because everything is accelerating, what we need from our scientists is for them to help us as quickly as possible, but it's very difficult, the whole peer-reviewed research program process, right? But the governments also need this because, as we've seen in recent years, they're all scrambling to catch up because they were following the data, and the data is now accelerating, and the reality is accelerating beyond the data, but the governments are still focusing their actions on this older data. So it's a real problem. So look, when it comes to everything to do with the planetary crisis, there is always going to be an absence of information. And I think being aware of where those absences are is important, because even though you don't have the information, the lack of information is information in itself. I always say that, right? But because there's just so many parts of the world where it's impossible. In Antarctica in the last few years, they've had a team of international scientists out there for a couple of months of the year when it's possible doing the work. Or in the deep, deep ocean, they just don't know what's going on. We're discovering new life forms in the depths of our ocean just now, and they're talking about deep sea mining, right? So we've got a lot of challenges, but I don't see it as a failure of science like many are talking about. I see it as a failure of technology, investment, definitely investment, government commitment and global collaboration, which is certainly lacking, along with the process of science, which exists for a good reason, because we don't want just wild guesses coming out, right? We need the process, but the speed of the process is too slow. And when you look at things like the IPCC reports, I always read it through the layer of it being a consensus report, which means it's going to be much, much more conservative than the reality on the ground. So I think it's a really important read. And he concludes that based on past data, August is when the global system is expected to stabilize. And if it doesn't, then we've moved into uncharted territory. So it's an interesting time.
I mean, it reminds me of the movie, what was it, 2012 or something? When they sort of made all these predictions, and then he sort of came up and said, we really don't know it's accelerating faster beyond all our models. So, and what that article was saying was, our models can't get to the depth of the oceans, for example, and can't get we can only scratch the surface on some of it. And there's a lot of assumptions involved, but it's dire. And I like the fact that he said, we don't know.
Yeah, me too.
It's that in a way that's more alarming. And so anybody that says, well, this is nonsense because of this, it kind of shuts them down a little bit, because the truth is you can't know to say that. But what we do know is this, and everything else is speculation. So, but it does say it's dire, and that that it may be moving faster than, certainly moving faster than we are. We already know that from the last 5 decades. But but it could go even faster, and we're just not prepared.
Well, the challenge that the world faces right now actually is a lack of scientific understanding, as in, like, you know, the a lot of people who are in charge who don't understand science. They have the wrong idea in terms of what it means to have a scientific report, for instance. And when they say, like, follow the science, they believe that science is something that is it's just it's binary, that it's true now and forever, that kind of thing, right? And what science is always doing is it's uncovering new information to understand the same thing. So the world we know, for instance, like the physics of the world, it should be a stable and unmoving thing. But we're learning more and more things about quantum physics, for instance. We're going deeper and deeper into the science, and now we're understanding a bit more. The things that we can't account for in the physical world, bit by bit, we're going like, oh, but there's another thing we're learning about, another thing we don't know about that we're trying to figure out. So with this as well, I think it's important to know that because a lot of people take the advantage, not a lot of people, some people take advantage of the fact that, oh, we don't know, so we don't have to worry about that. And actually it's the wrong way of looking at this. We don't have a complete picture, therefore we can't definitively say, great polishing, by the way, Tim, we can't definitively say that, you know, like, it's because of this, because of that. So people use that excuse to say, oh, because the scientists can't know for sure what's happening, we can therefore, there's a kind of an escape clause, right? But, you know, scientists have a kind of idea. There's a space where we have hypothesis, right? Where you see all the evidence and you go like, well, the hypothesis that is the most likely is such and such and such, right? So in science, it's usually frowned upon when you try to go with a hypothesis. People like say, well, now we need to go and prove it to take it to the next level, which is, in the very confusing term, a theory, where it's more, it actually has more foundation. So you know, what we need is more people to understand science, more leaders to understand science, and people to communicate science. You need people to be able to tell somebody else why something makes sense, even though last week it seems to be that science said something else. Because right now, not enough people know that. And what it leads to right now is science skeptics. People think that, you know, science doesn't know, science is changing its story, changing its mind, whatever it is. And when literally, if you study and understand science, that is the nature of it. The publishing, every time you hear about a paper being published or something like this, there's every chance that there is some kind of controversy about the paper. It's different from the past. It's a new update, whatever it is. And that's literally what science is about. It's about finding out what's new and then seeing what's wrong with it, so that they can you know, like, duplicate a result, for instance. So the world needs more scientific people. It needs to understand science better, and it needs definitely more scientific not calculators, scientific communicators.
Absolutely.
I wish the world would kind of, personally, I wish the world would kind of acknowledge what you just said, Joe, about the changing nature of science when it comes to thinking about theology. But let's move past that and get straight into Mr. Trump, who is in the news yet again. This time it's about
he's in the news. Strange.
Yeah, it's amazing he's in the news. I think he just loves the news. But in this case, his news isn't that great news for him. It's about his bond for the New York fraud case. His lawyers have said that he is unable to get the $464 million guarantee. So he can't find a private company to guarantee this giant amount that he's been ordered to pay in the New York civil fraud case. And he must either pay the full amount in cash or secure a bond to avoid having his assets seized. If he's unable to do so by the 25th of March, which is in 3 days' time, he faces the prospect of some of his real estate assets being seized by the state's attorney general. In his statement, Mr. Trump said that the bond he was asked to pay would be impossible for any company, including one as successful as mine. I don't know if he said quite like that. I don't know who that was, actually. Never mind. I haven't done Trump in a while. The bonding companies, believe me, the bonding companies have never heard of such a bond of this size before, he said. Mr. Trump's team spent countless hours negotiating with one of the largest insurance companies in the world, but they concluded that very few bonding companies will consider a bond of anything approaching that magnitude. The lawyers said that they'd approached 30 companies without success. This, of course, also means, and this is the super, super dangerous part about this. He's running for president, and let's say he gets in, but had managed to secure $464 million worth of bonding, but not from the United States. So what does that mean? I mean, he could be very vulnerable for foreign influence. Let's just pick a couple of countries out of thin air: Russia, Saudi Arabia, anywhere, quite frankly. Potentials, I mean, they've got the potential to cough up the money. But if they do, what promises will they expect in return? So keep an eye on it. Where does the money come from, or does he lose some of his billion-dollar assets? Yeah.
Well, the thing that is important to note about this is that it's not that a bond like this hasn't been made before. People have actually, companies come forward to take up bonds like that, right? When the risk is considered to be a good risk. That's something that people have to kind of understand about this. So, the idea that the insurance industry can come up with this kind of a bond is not true. It's because no one wants to do the bond for Trump. That's the truth about that. That's the difference about the story.
I did the calculations, and this is not a good deal.
Yeah, especially I think it starts with the word Trump.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add, we were talking about the anti-science. So I was just reading an article that's basically talking about how we've gone into World War III already. We just haven't noticed, and it's basically information warfare, but also intelligence and the masses following, authoritarian sort of governments, populist governments, that sort of thing. But one of the things that jumped out at me, there's been a 13-point decline in human IQ since 1975.
I'm responsible for at least 12 of those.
I'm responsible for the other 112.
Yeah, right. But what I found really interesting about that stat is they actually think, because of the novel entities in our environment, so plastics, microplastics, the chemicals and all that sort of stuff, it's actually, that's what's responsible for the decline of IQ.
I don't think so. I think it's social media. I think we're getting our information from dumb sources.
Since 1975. So we can't blame social media. That's really only sort of came about in 2006, but more mainstream sort of 2010, But when you start looking at all the research,
movies. Schwarzenegger movies.
Well, yeah.
They were the 80s.
Well, I'm going to say actually it's cultural as well. I think what's happened is we've had a shift in terms of what we treasure and what we think is important, right? I mean, it used to be way back in the good old days when it was really about reading, writing, and arithmetic, right? It was it was a time when really education, information, reading, and getting more books and whatever was seen as a really big thing. And I think it has declined over time. It's been a culture of, I was just talking to somebody the other day, and I realized that this whole idea of emotional intelligence has taken over the world. And it's not taken over the world, I feel, in a healthy way, in the sense that it's not been alongside intelligence in the usual sense of the word, but it's kind of replacing that, as in, like, I don't care what the facts are, I know what I feel. And I
you said
think
that as EQ.
I don't see
So
that
it's
as
a
EQ. I
combination
see
of
that as
things.
more as pluralism.
No. I mean, look, it's about just this. It's the rise of self-esteem without the lack. It's the rise of self-esteem without the cred to go along with that. You don't it's like I'm very confident in myself now, but I have little reason to, because we've come to a point where now everybody has a right to be confident, to be happy, to be everybody has everybody's opinion is
So if it is
is
EQ, it would be
foundation.
very low EQ.
Sorry?
Yeah, but so you're talking about toxic positivity, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a combination of things, which I think what it does is then it reduces the need for you to kind of review things intellectually, and that's what actually helps to breed IQ. IQ is actually you can actually increase your IQ with the practice of going through puzzles and thinking what you can actually increase your IQ, and you can get dumb with a beer, right? So that's the kind of thing that you can work on. You need to. I think the world needs to spend a bit more time on being intellectual and having more fun. And there's been a decline socially in terms of the how intellectuals are viewed. And I think if you look back at the curve, I think the 70s is about right, and that was the last time it really was kind of cool to be intellectual.
Color television.
Yeah.
Let's go with color TV as being the problem. Because
There you
TV
go.
was the thing in the 70s. TV was the thing where it was just draining the IQ of the nation as everybody sat in front of the box and just was fed whatever was fed. So it's media, social media, but it was one way. And now it's the blind leading the blind on social.
I think it's lack of investment in education, especially in wealthy countries. I think Australia, the UK, America, they've really, really dropped back on their education. I think there's social issues, pregnancy, how healthy the women are, giving birth to children that, whether drug, alcohol, or just full of toxic novel entities. But the numbers, this article I was reading, I'm going to put it in my weekend reads. It's a really good one. They were talking about what the issues and what's causing it, especially with information and misinformation. And number 6 of 6 is the simple-minded. And when Donald Trump was elected, they showed this huge sort of map of where he really dominated in the election, and the opioid epidemic, and people on Xanax and antidepressives, and the scale of people who were using those sort of medications was incredibly high. So I think there's a lot of different factors, and it's a concern that we need to get on top of. And also, every time the intellectuals are attacked, you look at the fall of Persia, the first place they go after, the extremists go after, are the intellectuals. So attacking the intellectuals is always a sign of it's not going to move the society forward. We need them, even though they can be pompous sometimes, right?
Well, once the party starts, you have to get rid of the boring people, right? I mean,
all right, Joe, an interesting one on incest.
Oh yeah, well, the next time you say, hello, brother, next to someone or to someone else, based on the increase of DNA testing in the world, we're finding out there's a lot more incest perhaps going on in the world. I'm not sure if this is necessarily a surprise, especially if you perhaps come from certain states in the U.S. I can't name any of them off the top of my head, but I was just looking at or watching the story of Boeing very recently, and I think their recent past CEO, all part of this declining story of Boeing over the years, actually I think ended up with his cousin. And I can kind of understand how you like people who are familiar, but there's no need to go all the way with them. But yeah, so according to this DNA, the rising results of DNA, it's showing up signs of that inbreeding. Now, it's important to note also actually that we do all sort of come from the same place. I mean, that ultimately is one of the fundamentals of genetics, right? If we go back enough steps, we are actually coming out of the same branches, and it sometimes it's a pretty complex idea. It's a pretty complex idea. There's something about it that was supposed to be set up to avoid that kind of pairing. It's good for genetics. It's good for health and all those reasons. But it also is something that is a reality. When you go back enough steps, enough generations, and you look at enough cultures, that it actually isn't as rare a thing. So the fact that it's showing up to me is not that strange. It's more like a fact. The fact that if you test for something, this is just going to show you that, yep, that's kind of the way it's been going down. And maybe it's a case of Western culture not realizing it's as prevalent in some other parts of the world as you previously didn't know.
Other than the monarchy.
Yeah.
Well, yes, there's always the monarchy as well. Yes.
Well, yeah, I found it really interesting. I've never done one of those DNA tests. Have you guys ever done it to find out, where you're from and what?
Yep,
if you found
I've done
it. And
1% African, apparently.
Yeah. So
I'm 25% embarrassing.
I think that's a little bit inaccurate.
Yeah. You didn't need to do a DNA test for that. What I found, so a long time ago, my grandmother was turning 100, and I thought, I'll try and get some DNA from her and do a test and give it to her for her 100th birthday. But I was in a different country, so I couldn't do it. But in the process, I started reading about what are those companies called? Ancestry.com.
Well, 23andMe. Well, Ancestry.com is actually about tracing the information part of it, but 23andMe is the one that actually does the DNA.
Right.
test.
Okay. Right. But what I found interesting is what basically these reports against submitting your DNA say is just be really careful, because when an insurance company gets access to your DNA, if you've got health insurance, your DNA tells them what your risks are. So before those risks even happen, the insurance could say, if this happens, we won't insure you. So if your DNA says you're going to have some sort of heart issue at some point, they can actually take it out of the insurance. So I don't know. I think we're a little bit free and easy with our data, and that's part of the problem.
I can reassure you about insurance. Right. In terms of insurance, and those are governments as well. There are many governments, and I'm not saying it's universal, but there are many governments where there are moratoria in place. Maybe Singapore is, of course, again, a leading edge example where the government has put a policy together with insurers that takes into consideration ideas about genetic testing and stuff like that, what they have a right to know, what they don't need, what insurers don't need to know, and the implications about insurance. And it's not always as bad as we think, because like I've got friends in the US, for instance, where their insurance companies, when they find out that you actually have a higher probability of getting a particular disease, what they do is they actually, as part of their insurance, will actually give you more coverage for the testing to prevent the ultimate disease, because it's actually financially cheaper for them to prevent the disease that you are likely to get than to actually have you had the disease and then cover the cost. So there are lots of unexpected benefits, I'm sure, along with the expected downsides. But government is working very hard. I know that, for instance, Australia had a bit of a difficulty as well. So like Singapore, what we try to do is we try to learn from everybody else's mistakes, right? So I think something happened in Australia in terms of the DNA data. Where I can't remember the details of it, but I know Singapore basically has come up with a moratorium with the insurance industry, and it's something that is not unique only to Singapore. Countries are putting these agreements together, these understandings together. Actually, what we need is actually an understanding about what you need to do with your own data, because you can be too honest. There is what you need to declare and what you don't to declare. And if you find out as a customer, actually as an individual, if you find out what your rights are, you can do a much better job with dealing with your insurance. You should know what isn't a legal question for the insurer to ask you. And I mean, the good thing about this actually is, because of such rules, the insurance companies have a lot to lose if they ask the wrong question as well. So it's a double-edged sword. It's stuff they can know about you, but there's also legislation in place to kind of protect you. So go and find out a bit about it. Don't just have a bad feeling about it and think it's terrible, because here's what I think about DNA testing. It is actually very useful to know. And if you can actually know ahead of time that, for instance, for women, that you have a propensity for BRCA, which is it's linked to breast cancer. I mean, I don't know enough about to tell you which one, but it's a BRCA1, BRCA2, there's a whole bunch of that, right? You can take the necessary actions to reduce your risks of such things creeping up, for instance, right? And it's just something for your own benefit, and it's something that is useful to know. It's not actually, to me, it's if you have a choice between finding out and then not knowing, if that is a choice you have, I would say not knowing doesn't necessarily make your life any better. It makes it riskier for you. You know, if you have the ability to choose between knowing and not knowing, I would suggest go with knowing, so that you can make decisions around that. There are plenty of discussions, of course, about things like what you feel is like. For instance, you might get dread because you find out that you have a 50% chance of some terrible disease happening right now, for instance. But then again, you can do something about that. You can try and work your way around it. So that's just my idea about it. It's not necessarily a universal idea. Many people feel protecting your happiness, your personal happiness, sometimes is a greater priority.
My DNA test said I had likely stronger smell sensitivity. Like I could pick up smell, and that's completely true. Like, it's completely true. Like, I can smell stuff, but people can't smell. And I was like, yeah, but you can't. And I didn't realize that everyone smelled different levels of sensitivity for the longest time.
Yeah, but you know what they say about he who smelt it, right?
Well, it also says that too, actually.
I reckon I could have been a nose. My sensitivity is so high, which is not a blessing if you can smell everything. Let me assure you. If I walk into someone's house and they've got a dirty toilet, I can smell it, and that's actually quite painful.
It's struggling where you are at the moment.
Yeah, so I would recommend in the Atlantic. I'd recommend. I mean, it's not a nice topic, incest, of course, and most people would want to step away. But I found the stories from the people who were born to incest. Some of them completely abandoned by their families, some of them raised by mothers that the father or the brother was the parent, and were not necessarily treated very well. Some were adopted, and it just really talks about their experiences. And I thought it was really powerful.
So this is immediate incest. This is not finding out in your ancestry. This is somebody. Oh wow. Okay.
People as adults finding out. Yeah, and it's through these DNA sites that.
There was some Netflix show or something or other about a doctor in America that when people came in for infertility treatment, he used his own semen, and basically half the town were his kids. Yeah. And they were getting married to each other and everything else, and they didn't know until it all was revealed. And then everybody's in this identity crisis, problem, horror, disaster, everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's slightly less.
I just muted you because you got some background noise, so maybe just mute yourself when you're not talking. Yeah, sorry, keep going.
No, I was saying a slightly less creepy news. I think it's Iceland who have a dating app, right? Where if you want to just before you go to the next step of your date, you can figure out if you're related.
Wow, we live in a world where that's necessary.
Tick.
Yeah. Okay. All right, so moving on, another environmental piece. So the World Meteorological Organization, WMO, has just released its all-encompassing report, State of Global Climate 2023, which obviously was a big year. And it basically brings together all of the scientific knowledge that you can get in the world. So BBC's Science Focus magazine decided to simplify it and gave us 4 top highlights. So number 1, Switzerland lost 10% of its glaciers over just the last 2 years. So if you don't know, glaciers are such a critical part of any ecosystem. The melts feed the rivers, deliver nutrients across the land, and of course provide drinking water for people at the bottom and around the world. So when you think about this one, it's not that they're going to lose 10% every 2 years moving forward. If the world keeps getting warmer, we could be seeing a really rapid loss of ice loss. And of course, when you lose the ice, you lose the albedo, which is basically the sun is reflected back out into space from the ice. And the less ice we have, the more sun that gets absorbed. And that's another thing that they think is going on. So the Earth energy imbalance is about the amount of sun going in versus being reflected back out. And so that's out of balance. So that's a really big thing for Europe and Switzerland. Number two, on any given day in 2023, a third of the oceans experienced a heat wave. Around 90% of the energy that has been accumulated in the Earth system since 1971 is stored in the ocean. And, in 2023, it reached the highest levels since observations began. And it could take centuries or possibly a millennia to reverse. Number three, the cost of climate inaction could be staggering. So basically, they are saying if we want to stop a 1.5 degrees Celsius rise, which I thought was interesting that they're even still referencing that, finance investments need to grow by more than 6 times, so reaching almost 9 trillion by 2030 and a further 10 trillion throughout to 2050. But if we don't do it, the cost of doing nothing will be way higher. So inaction throughout 2025 to 2100 will cost $1,266 trillion. And fourth, Antarctic winter sea ice was 1 million kilometres squared below the previous record. So one of the scientists, the climate systems scientist I listen to is Paul Betwith, and he talks a lot about this. And he believes that we're going through a blue ocean event in Antarctica. It's expected in the Antarctic when all the ice goes, but we've lost so much ice around Antarctica, which means the oceans are absorbing more heat, which could be contributing to the sea level rise. So a big report. They put another red alert on it. We've had lots of red alerts, but, I don't know. Will we listen? So there's a video in the Weekend Reads, which is the head of the WMO and the head of the World Meteorological Organization, WMA, and World Health Organization. And they're talking about these findings. So I recommend having a watch. It's only about 20, 30-minute watch. So it's a good one.
Yeah, I had a look at that. I really liked how she said that the glaciers were the world's storage tanks, the water tanks from where we get our water from. And if they're gone, we're in trouble.
Big trouble.
Big trouble. And so then migration becomes a huge challenge for countries. But what I like about that cost of climate inaction, it's the first time I've seen the cost of doing nothing. And in my promotion pay rise programs and stuff like that, I always talk about this thing called the one-page business case, which is presenting 4 scenarios, and scenario 0 is the cost of doing nothing. And then there's scenario 1, 2, and 3. And we always choose scenario 2 as being the, Goldilocks, the just right scenario. But it needs the cost of doing nothing, because otherwise the default is no. And when you're talking to people whose main language is P&L or cost and expense or whatever, they're going to look at 1,266 trillion versus 19 trillion as possibly the motivating kick in the butt that they might need to actually do something. And if that could be localized from global to national, that would be really interesting. The challenge is that she said also that the focus area needs to be Africa. There's a huge possibility of investment in Africa of renewables because their renewable footprint is extremely low. And I'm struggling right now to see why these countries would do that unless energy can be exported in a significant way.
Yeah. I don't think it. I mean, I thought it was great how she mentioned Africa, because if you could put solar and wind right across Africa, it could make a phenomenal difference as the amount of pollution that's created. A lot of the oil and gas companies in Africa are being purchased by conglomerates in Africa, which operate with much less sort of environmental concern. There's so many aspects to it, but what I think we really need to be doing is definitely in Africa, but we also need to be doing it in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh.
Yep.
China's already got itself, moving in that direction. Philippines, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia. We need to be looking right across the global south at the countries who are still using far too much coal.
A lot of them, with
massive populations, but also, outdoor workers, people living on, less than $10 a day, those sort of figures. And we need to be putting the energy in place so they can stay cool. So they just have different options. And there's environmental benefits. They're showing more and more. If you put solar farms out, there's an environmental change that can happen underneath it with insects and birds, because they've got this protection. So there's so many. But the wealthy countries don't want to invest in the poorer countries. But then
the poor countries is just a way to go in and take stuff without, like you said, without the compliance.
Yeah, but then they're going to have to accept the migration, which they're not going to like, and that's going to create more destabilization. So we've got to do everything we can to keep people where they are and keep them safe where they are, so that we can keep the world sort of relatively peaceful. And when we don't seem to have the courage at the sort of the global sort of political level, business level to talk about that. I don't know if you saw, have we got it as a topic, the Saudi Aramco CEO?
Next.
I think we have. Yeah. All right. Yeah. Let's talk about that, because sorry, Joe, you were going to say something.
I was going to talk about some of the perhaps silver lining aspects of this particular the climate problem, right? You talk about the cost of doing nothing. There's a lot of unreported doing something that's going on in the world right now. As in, I've been talking to startups, different people, and the incidence of startups who are doing things about the environment is actually quite high. And I think these numbers actually aren't getting into the P&L, if you like, of this particular equation. So I think there is actually quite a lot of work and attention going on into that particular area. It's just not showing up in the reports yet. And it's funny. Some of these companies actually don't want to report their progress because they don't want to hamper other efforts in the area as well. I think one Swedish company had very successfully proven that they were able to actually trap carbon from the atmosphere, and they actually tried to keep it on the down low, because they thought that by letting the world know that they had managed to do this, it was actually going to stop people from actually doing anything about the problem. So this is the thing that I think silver lining. There are a lot of people working on the problem. We just don't know about them, and I'm hoping some sort of revolution along the lines of what you hear with Chat GPT and AI and what have you may come along in this particular field as well, and it may come on more suddenly in a stronger way than you might imagine. It'd be very interesting to see as well if China shows up as the knight in shining armor, because all the countries you talked about, they're kind of corresponding to the Belt and Rail plan that China has, and China's doing it for themselves. Why not do it for everybody else as well? And look, if you want a hero story, China saves the world is not a bad headline.
It would be that would be fantastic. Yeah, but maybe I guess what we were talking about before then is, we need more renewables, and we need to phase out oil. And in CNBC, the title is Saudi Aramco CEO says energy transition is failing. The world should abandon the fantasy of phasing out oil. I guess the question is, perhaps if they'd tried to phase out oil, that would be a reasonable claim. But as expected, this is creating a big storm. To summarize, the Saudi Aramco CEO Amin Nasser said Monday that the energy transition is failing, and policymakers should abandon the fantasy of phasing out oil and gas, as demand for fossil fuels is expected to grow in the coming years. He said, in the real world, the current transition strategy is visibly failing on most fronts, as it collides with 5 hard realities. A transition strategy reset is urgently needed, and my proposal is this: we should abandon the fantasy of phasing out oil and gas and instead invest in them adequately, reflecting realistic demand assumptions. That sounds to me like shift the spend from putting it in that to back on oil and gas, and he happens to be the CEO of an oil and gas company. Anyway, let's just move on. NASA said alternative energy sources have been unable to displace hydrocarbons at scale, despite the world investing more than 9.5 trillion over the past 2 decades. Wind and solar currently supply less than 4% of the world's energy, while total electric vehicle penetration is less than 3%, he said. Meanwhile, the share of hydrocarbons in the global energy mix has barely fallen in the 21st century from 83 to 80%. Global demand has increased by 100 million barrels of oil equivalent per day during the same period and will reach an all-time high this year, the CEO said. Gas has grown 70% since the start of the century. The transition from coal to gas is responsible for 2/3 of the reductions in carbon emissions in the US. This is hardly the future picture some people have been painting, NASA said. Even they are starting to acknowledge the importance of oil and gas security. Developing nations in the global south, meanwhile, will drive oil and gas demand as prosperity rises in those nations, which represent more than 85% of the world's population, the CEO said. These nations receive less than 5% of the investment targeting renewable energy, he mentioned. That's from the ampproject.org. Saudi Aramco CEO says energy transition failing. It's the report. You're muted, Andrea.
As someone who's paying attention to what's going on, right? And I see these statements and the way the media presents them, and I see the way people respond to them. And the truth of the matter is, if we shut off the taps tomorrow, everything would collapse because our entire global economy is based on fossil fuels. So in some ways, what he's saying is correct. We're not going to stop using fossil fuels. We aren't. Not in any sort of short-term future. We're not. So, but we do need to massively scale down our use of fossil fuels, and there is a responsibility on us to do that as well. So one of the things I've been talking about, is we've got 3.8 billion middle-class people buying clothes, buying homes, buying cars, buying everything, right? So the scale of the human population. And we've all moved towards that American dream of what it means to be a middle-class person, and it's costing us the earth. So we need to scale it all down, but we also need to scale down fossil fuel infrastructure. But there's another issue with the fossil fuel infrastructure. A lot of the global players, they can't improve facilities because there's no money to go into those investments because we're supposed to be reducing our fossil fuel assets, right? So we've actually got inefficient sort of oil fields that need investing in, which would make them actually environmentally better. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, this whole conversation, I think.
I mean, my question is, if I gave $1 billion to the oil and gas industry to make their drilling site, their current equipment better, my skepticism is that they wouldn't spend it on making it better. They'd spend it on drilling more stuff. But yeah, it's a fair call. It's a balanced. Actually, it's a very balanced perspective that you just shared, Andrea.
Well, the problem that I think we face right now is there is too much effort and time and money being spent on theater. I think if you can figure out a way to get over ourselves and say, like, okay, we recognize that this is bad, it's part of the process, and I think if we can get over ourselves, then we can be more efficient. Right now, the inefficiencies, I mean, not all the inefficiencies, but there's some inefficiencies that are coming about because we're just we're just doing the theater of it, right? It's trying to defend this, to defend that, having departments to do that. So, greenwashing doesn't just come out because people are just evil. It's because, well, the need is out there, and now there's a way that we have to meet this particular thing, and we happen to be in this particular industry, and it's just terribly inconvenient, right? So I've been in those meetings where behind closed doors, they've been talking about the challenge, as in like they recognize their role, they recognize what's needed, they recognize all that, but at the same time, they're the least popular people in the room. They're the uncomfortable, uncle who's doing something, terrible. I mean, the family members. If people are in the sewage business, it doesn't seem like a very good thing, but it's very important as well, right? So it's still the oil business is the business of energy, and humans need energy. Unless we figure another way of converting and storing it rapidly, the source of energy is still going to be hydrocarbons. It's all the stored energy from the past, all the the death over 1 million years of other things. It's all been stored in these things, and we've discovered a way to release it. So that's on us, right? So unless we get really comfortable with nuclear, then we're gonna go, okay, well, let's keep going with this. We could, on the flip side, get really good with nuclear. It'd be fun to see what happens, with the slight risk of a nuclear meltdown. Well, how we would do if we could just completely eradicate it. Because if you think about energy needs, they can be replaced very successfully by the nuclear solution. We just don't have the gumption to do it, I don't think.
I think Bill Gates is making some progress there with his nuclear solution, which was featured in one of a Netflix documentary a few years ago. But there seems to be more rumblings about that. I always think for the future humans that survive the apocalypse, they're going to be thinking, we made it through, and then they're going to have to deal with the nuclear meltdown going on in their community, because they won't have the scientists left to deal with it. I mean, but the most important thing is, so Nate Hagen's used this term, energy blind. We're all energy blind. We don't see how much energy we do. Like if you look at your own life and how much energy you use, and it's not just driving a car and putting petrol in it. It's the food that you eat and where it comes from and how it's grown and how much water it uses, and if there's any deforestation associated with it. The clothes you wear, where they come from, are they fast fashion? Are they made of plastics? What we clean our bodies with, what we clean our homes with. We're completely blind, and we're not thinking of the scale of all of these different things. So I think if we're going to solve it, we need to all come together and solve it together. And I agree, we've got to just stop oil, right? But we've built a society on the back of it, and we haven't done anything to stop that. So to stop it, it can't be sudden, it has to be gradual, but we all need to understand what we need to let go, or we won't achieve it. So, yeah.
Speaking of letting go, from old cell phones to broken refrigerators and discarded e-cigarettes, global electronic waste has reached record highs and is growing 5 times faster than rates of recycling, bringing a host of health, environmental, and climate problems. And the numbers are staggering. In 2022, the world generated 62 million metric tons of electronic waste, also known as e-waste. Now, I don't know how many buses full of giraffes that is in American terms, but it's 62 million metric tons of electronic waste. Putting that in perspective, here is the perspective. This waste could fill more than 1.5 million 40 metric ton trucks if placed bumper to bumper on an asteroid somewhere in space, and it could form a line long enough to wrap around the equator. The e-waste is the umbrella term for any discarded product that has a plug or a battery and often contains toxic and dangerous substances such as mercury and lead. As the world becomes ever more reliant on electronics and increasing amounts are being sold in developing countries for the first time, this hazardous waste stream is booming. Global e-waste in 2022 was up 82% compared to 2010. According to the report, this is on track to rise a further 32% to reach 82 million metric tons in 2030. That's a lot. That's a lot.
How many devices do you have?
I've thrown them all away, so I don't have that many left. No, yeah, I've got lots of devices. I mean, just doing this,
yeah.
I've got has got 7 or 8 different devices plugged in, I think.
Yeah.
So,
and that's the problem, right? The average person, especially in wealthy countries, or people of wealth of any country, 3, 4, 5 devices. It's PlayStations and whatever those things are, phones, PCs, tablets, and we've got so many of them, and there's people around the world who had none. But the growth numbers are.
It'd be interesting. It'd be interesting if we had this sort of 5-year this is a terrible idea, but I'm just going to put it out there anyway. A 5-year, nothing new gets released in 5 years. So there's no upgrade to this for 5 years. But over that 5 years, people are developing cool stuff. So this thing needs to be built to last at least 5 years, maybe 10 years or something like that. And then at that 5-year mark, boom, everything is released. It's like a huge expo. And we go out and we go, oh, cool. Okay, well, I'm going to buy. Wow, this great leap of for mankind. And then, of course, we've got massive recycling over the next 5 years of the stuff that we've got. It's a terrible idea, but it's
circularity, right, needs to happen, which would stop a lot of the extraction because we don't need it, because we've already got it. We've already pulled this stuff out of the ground, so we need to reuse it. That needs to be cost effective and environmentally safe, because a lot of that's done in really poor countries where the children are getting exposed to all sorts of toxic chemicals. I actually think for the next 10 years, any company listed on a public stock exchange should not be allowed to pay out any money to investors, and that money should go into a central fund where we put it into investing in doing everything we can to save the planet. And at the end of the 10 years, if we've still got a planet, they can start getting their shares back, with their payouts back. But that's my idea.
It's not gonna. As soon as that's announced, everybody's taking their money out of the stock market.
Yeah, but that's the sort of scale that we need,
Yeah. Actually, what it could be. This is going to sound dumb as well. Is that on a surprise date, there is a massive global recession. Or a global stock market meltdown where, a third of the stock market is wiped out. And in fact, that never happens. It's just that's removed. And then everybody goes back into their how to rebuild it all again. But that chunk that would have been lost in past stock market meltdowns actually is the investment. But again, as soon as you start talking about that, people are going to pull their money out of the mechanism that's going to lose all of this cash. So these are all fantasy things, but that's where you get some sort of mad dictator doing this sort of thing to be able to save the world, who becomes very unpopular, but manages to do something.
I think what Europe is doing is quite interesting, because they're looking at things about repairability. That they come down quite hard recently on Apple, because Apple's always had these very closed systems, and you have to repair through Apple. It's all expensive, so it's kind of discouraging to actually try to repair your devices. But Europe has made it mandatory right now for Apple to make its products serviceable, so you can actually have third parties involved. It's the right to repair. And I think Europe has actually done a number of things which have been very business unfriendly, which is environmentally friendly. And it's all the hard stuff. So I think that's going to be something that we can look at. The rise of the repairmen is something that's going to I think make a difference. It was one, I think, a long time ago. I can't remember what it was, but it was just about someone came up. Oh yeah, I know what it was. They had these compatible devices for Apple, and some third party came up with an idea of how to retrofit a processor on an Apple computer, which is something you can't ever do now. But back in the day, it was a means for you to have an old Apple computer, but then suddenly renew it because you could change the heart of it and upgrade the CPU. And if that kind of thinking actually were to come on board, we could end up with a lot of savings in terms of e-waste. I like that. I like the idea that actually you put a rule there in place that you have when you produce a product, it needs to last at least 5 years. I think that would be a really good thing, because I think like just batteries, for instance, like now I get a car battery, no one expects it to last more than a year and a half. And I remember back in the day, I had batteries that were 5 years old.
Yeah. But it's got to be longer than 5 years. You look at, I was looking at the drop in white goods, and today compared to, the 1970s, we'd have a TV for 20, 30 years. They were crap. But they lasted before you upgraded. Now you upgraded. I mean, we had one LG flat screen TV. It died just on its 2-year warranty, and for us to get it fixed is just crazy amount of money, and it's just not worth it. But let's move on because we're running out of time. But so one of the topics that we've talked about a lot is longevity. And it's something that Joe brings up a lot because he's got a real interest and he's done a lot of work in it. I'm not saying you're an expert, Joe, but you've had a really good sort of insight on the front line of what's been going on here, listening to the scientists. And when I started looking into it, because you got me interested in it, I found it unbelievably satisfying and realized that I have actually done some of these longevity things. I didn't even know that I was doing them. So do you want to just quickly sort of take us through what's the longevity industry? Help us understand it. What's its mission? And give us a sense of what's going on, because I've got some ideas about it from another perspective but I want to hear what you say first.
Well, there are many schools of thought, literally about schools. I mean, as in like it's academic, right? So there is one school which is about extending life so that you don't die. That's the idea that we can prolong your life by deferring death. But that leads to other problems, which has to do with your healthy life, because the pharmacy industry, the medical industry, beauty, wellness, all that kind of thing. It's very tempting for them to get on board because why not prolong life? Because someone now who's older wants to look better, wants to feel better, and you could provide all these solutions. So there is that industry. There is also the other side of things where what they're trying to do is now extend a health span. So, the idea of being a 70-year-old is not about being a 70-year-old as you think of it, but you actually are now, if done correctly, you could be a 50-year-old in a 70-year-old chronologically, 70-year-old body, but you'll be 50. And there is research being done on the idea of curing aging. Because if you think about aging, what really aging is about is it's a failure of your systems to keep you young. Because when you're young, when everything is still working, your cells replace themselves, and the failure rate is very low, so that you look pretty much the same on your 26th year versus your 25th year. But as you get older, more and more systems fail genetically, and then what happens is you lose flexibility, you lose elasticity, and all that kind of stuff, and then you see the products of aging. So there is a significant part of the scientific community that's trying to work on the symptoms of aging to prevent that, so that you can lead literally a longer life simply because you aren't dying. What really is happening for most people is that we're, in a sense, we're sort of dying in certain areas. Some of our systems, as they're being reproduced, are not being reproduced accurately, and we have certain cells in the body that actually have there's an actual limit to the number of times it will duplicate before it begins to say, okay, well, I've got no more for you. So I look at it this way. I'm on the side where people are trying to really cure the usual things. There is progress in the area of eyesight, for instance. They've been able to, in mice, reverse blindness. There are people who are working on a pill for $1 a day, basically, that would eradicate 1/4 of all the deaths in the world because it would stop heart disease. That sort of thing. So it's a complicated thing. Of course, while all that's happening, there are a lot of people who are just opportunists, right? You're gonna have people who go like, well, people are gonna live longer. We can make them feel wary or scared about it, and we can exploit that. And marketers are marketers, and they can find those gaps in the market, and they can make people feel better about that as well. So it's really a mixed bag. It's how we are as human beings. It's how industry behaves, and you're entitled to feel what you feel about it and take the necessary action. But I think the biggest thing you should try to take away from it is just have a sense of hope that if you can figure out how to live longer, you can also live better. don't assume that if you're going to live longer, you're going to do less as you grow older. Think about the alternatives. I mean, when I think about when someone gets old, they say, "Oh, you got to sort of relax, step back, do less." And actually, the medical science seems to say not so much. You actually should get active. One of the biggest determinants of whether you will live a long time is how much you move and how fast you move. So if you keep moving, that alone is going to lead you to live a longer life. And the other thing is just socializing. Just have yourself some friends, catch up with people, talk all the time, and that kind of thing really helps. So just very quick thought. Sorry about it's all disorganized in my head, but that's the reply I got for you.
No, it's interesting. So it's about sort of the core of it is it's about sort of putting. It's the basic molecules that form us. It's about interfering in that, right? That's my very basic understanding of it. But so a couple of things. So arguably, we've already been doing this for a really long time because we've never been as long lived as we are now. But what it's doing is it's creating a crisis because we've got all these aging populations and not enough replacement. But the one thing I keep sort of thinking about is if people are aging healthier and are more able to keep moving and do things, that's probably a good outcome, right? Rather than just having an aging population that needs to be taken care of by a smaller population than before, which means higher taxes and all that sort of stuff. But at the same time, is that really where we should be focusing in the world at the moment? Because we've already got too many people. We're facing these potential catastrophic events where we potentially could lose millions or billions of people, like a massive heat extreme event, which we're starting to see the beginnings of now. Is it somewhere where we should be even thinking about investing? Like that's I suppose that's the thing that I keep coming back to.
So if we look at the world the way we know it today, then the answer definitely is not. It doesn't seem to be something that's worthwhile. But you need to rethink what it would mean to be in a world where your 80-year-old friend looks like a 40-year-old and they have the energy of a 40-year-old. They have the wisdom of an 80-year-old person with the mental health of a 30 to 40-year-old person as well. So they're not hampered in any way. The idea that you would have someone like Joe Biden, for instance, in a world where all this has worked out, looking younger than any one of us right now on the screen. And if you think about having to replace the population and stuff like that, then it really completely changes that idea. People who want to replace themselves would be people who just have had enough and want to retire, and they retire whichever way they want to. But those people who want to be involved, and you just imagine a world where it's a human right to be young. Because of the shared science, because of the way we look after ourselves as a society. Imagine if everybody had this. If for instance, like for the pill, to eradicate heart disease was not something you had to buy yourself, but like the COVID, vaccination, government said, yeah, sure, we'll do this for everybody who lives in our world. We'll invest $365 per person so that 1/4 of them will not die from heart disease. And if you think about the world, the generational change that can happen, it sounds like science fiction, but you really think about this, right? Where your eyes don't start to falter when you get to 40, where your heart doesn't begin to show signs of heart disease, where your muscles don't start to break down, where your bones don't start to show signs of osteoporosis, where women and their fertility goes all the way into their 70s. If you think about it right now, because you have that very insulting idea of you got a 40-year-old woman getting pregnant and you get labeled as a geriatric pregnancy, right? Mm-hmm. It's a fundamental change to the way we think about it. Because right now we're looking at it from our perspective right now. Do I want to live? Do I want to live for a very long time? We're thinking in terms of a 75-year-old, 85-year-old as we know it. I wouldn't mind living for a long time as somebody in my 35-year-old body. And that's the kind of thing that the crazy scientists are really trying to work on. They're trying very much to solve that problem. How do you teach your body to replace itself with young cells? Because you think about our body, every single molecule actually in our body gets replaced. I think over a year or less than a year, I think every single molecule is actually changed. Every atom is changed. It's left, it's come and gone, right? What if we could change the way that information is retained? What if we could figure a way, for instance, how we could manage our energy so that it can do a better program? And could we even try and reprogram the whole thing and start doing even more radical things? I mean, it's like I said, it's science fiction. It sounds like it, but you know, all science today was science fiction maybe 10 years, 20 years ago.
Yeah. I'm going to ask for Tim's perspective, especially because I think it would be really important with what you're doing at the moment. But do you think, Joe, that the people who are behind this are motivated by the right reasons, or is greed the main reason? Because if greed's the main reason, they're not necessarily going to do the right things, and it's not going to be democratized where everyone has access to the benefits. It's just going to be the few, like what is currently available today, because it's so expensive to do so many of these things. Do you think the right motivations are behind it?
I think the range, it's a range of motivations. There are some people who are legitimately, driven by the idea of saving humanity, and there's some who are legitimately driven by the idea of they wanting to live forever. There's some people who are, there's some famous characters who just want to have that the ability to live the lifestyle that they always enjoy. They just want to be young forever and have multiple partners, and it's really quite a mix of characters, right? And I think about this in terms of being an opportunist, really. Good can come out of everything. I mean, you can be motivated by money and do a good thing. It's not mutually exclusive. So I think, we will reap what we expect to get from something, because we can look at it and say, like, well, this is not a great thing. And we will be disappointed with that. But I think if you look for the benefit of it, like, for instance, if you do the math, someone does the math and goes like, there is actually right now in medical science, there is single treatment chemotherapy. That means because of the customization of the molecules to your particular DNA, you can have one dose of chemotherapy and be done with cancer, right? So in other words, it's a cure, right? It's possible now already, and the cost of it is in the hundreds of thousands of dollars right now. And some people go like, how could you charge for this? But from a bigger medical perspective, it actually is cheaper than long-term medical care of a chronic situation. So some of it has to do with the economics of it. Would this cure ever have come if there wasn't a financial incentive? And the answer simply would be no. It would be impossible to have done all the research you need to do and to run the kind of development, because you need a huge facility to create this particular cure, but which can cure a person with, potentially in just one dose. We can't always go to the motivations and say, because we don't agree with the motivations, we don't like the result of it. I think what we should look at is what is it that could be the benefit here, and what price are we prepared to pay for it? It's a bit like the trolley problem. Someone was just talking about this today. Like, what if you stepped into a hospital and you realized that your body could save 5 people if you donated all your organs? What would you do? That kind of problem. You know what I mean?
Back out. Yeah. Okay. I mean, I get your point, Joe. I think there is even a noble motivation of wanting to save one person and doing the research to get to save that person, or because you couldn't save that person, wanting to make sure that nobody goes through that pain again, would be an interesting one. I as the discussion was going on, a few different thoughts were bouncing through my head. one of them was, if we've got the capacity to do these sorts of incredible things, how can anybody be going hungry in the world? Was one thing. So then, and then how are we, and then I was like, how do we direct the focus of our medical research for the betterment of humanity? Could it be to save, to be able to diagnose and save a child from some of these issues, and then put it in and help that child, for example? But to focus it on, a 70-year-old going, or a 50-year-old going, I want to have another 2 decades of being 30. And maybe that's where the money comes to fund everything else, and maybe the taxation that affluent person pays can go into doing something else. But it just seems like a societal commentary of a generation that is so extraordinarily self-centered and individualistic and possibly secular, that they've come to the position of what life from now to my end means to me is preserving myself at the possible, not even thinking about at the expense of anything else. But if the focus is being directed on preserving myself for another 20 years and making myself look beautiful, versus the focus perhaps being somewhere else. So I guess, to use your walking into a hospital idea, it's the challenge with that one is I have to lose my life immediately to save those 5 people. But if walking into the hospital was, I'm walking into the hospital to get a treatment to make myself look beautiful, but instead I see 5 people, and if I could pay for them, instead of getting the treatment, I could pay for them to live for the same amount of money, would I do that? And I think that's the more realistic, that's the actual question that I'm arguing. And I think the answer is, if I could see the person and feel compassionate about their plight, I would give them the money. But if there were an article in a magazine that's on a shelf that I may not read, I probably wouldn't give them the money. Or if I was so fixated on, running for president, or my own self-aggrandizement, and my own legacy is the one that just drives me crazy. That's it. It's basically, we could just replace all those words with my own ego, and trying to stop something that is inevitable. And basically, we're just trying to buy some time. My question is, what are you doing with the time that you have now? And are we playing with the sense of urgency? Do we have a long-term perspective? From a Christian perspective, for me, I'm not really worried about the dying part. I probably wouldn't want to be dying today. And there was an article that Andrea shared, which I just thought was fantastic. It wasn't anything to do with Christianity. It was more to do with just this guy thinking that he'd lived a really solid life, and he'd been diagnosed and he was going to die, and he was 46 years old. And how grateful he was for the quality and the impact and the experience that he had on his time here, where there's a lot of people that are just pampering themselves, and I just feel squandering an opportunity. And so I feel like it's a social commentary that would be an interesting discussion for people to think about themselves as to, how am I living life? What is there beyond life? From my perspective, that's something I'm investing in 2 things right now from a theological studies perspective. One is a study of understanding what is the theological framework, and and that encompasses a life beyond this life through a relationship with God, and so I'm investing in that. And I know that for some people that's going to just wind them up the wrong way, and they're going to get all crazy. But then there's another part to it, and that is the world, as we've just discussed over this entire show and this entire series, the world is getting in more and more trouble. And we're asking for people to do something. And we're asking for them to make a sacrifice to a degree. And that sacrifice may be on the cream that they put on their face to make themselves look 30. Or it may be on the sacrifice of some comfort that they have in a short term to be able to make a real difference for people everywhere for a future. But that's not why I'm studying theology. I'm studying theology more from a practitioner, in one sense, as a practitioner, apart from the belief system and helping people with their beliefs, is as a practitioner of hope, and being able to give people who are really facing the world crumbling to be able to turn to someone who is willing to walk with them in the mess, rather than sell them a snake oil that will buy them, rather than being somebody else that is selling snake oil to buy somebody another 20 years of squander. It's like, it's to be the counselor to help somebody journey through pain and suffering. And I don't really, I would love to just have the comfort and everything else, but what the world is going to need is dealing with loss and grief. And we need it already, but we're going to need it even more. And and it's going to be, and to deal with the loss, I think for most people is going to be their way of life rather than the people that they lose. I think the grieving is going to be, it used to be so good. Why couldn't we have done something? Why didn't something happen? Why didn't they pay attention? And it's to get through that. And the whole gospel message is, the struggle that people have is, well, if God's so good, why didn't he click his fingers and make everything better? And the short answer to that is, there is a better, and this was good. In fact, Genesis is simply, he made the place, it was great. He made humans, they were great, and we screwed everything up, which is what we've been talking about over the last X number of series of the show. And how do we make things better? And the weird thing is, we kind of can't, but there is a possibility of making it better, but human nature needs to change. And where is the investment in changing human nature? For me, it's in the church. For me, it's in the church, but for others, it could be in a spiritual journey or pathway that is changing people from being self-centered individualists to being compassionate communityists, not communists, but community-centered people. And I think that's where I think I'm going to end up. And I don't have a lot of time at my age to be in effective ministry. I can be in ministry for the rest of my life, to be honest. But to be in formal ministry, it's probably going to be 10 to 15 years. But if in those 10 to 15 years I could walk people through their pain and maybe influence a few others to do the same, to be compassion walkers, and to say that there is a hope that's beyond where we are, then I will do that.
Nice. I knew that it was going to be a really interesting perspective, just, bringing what you've been doing in the last few years. Because one of the things that I kind of, when I was listening to Joe, right? So to me, the longevity conversation is like the artificial intelligence conversation. Everyone's so excited about it. And when you're one of the people that are going, I know you guys are really excited about it, but have you seen this? Have you heard this? don't ignore this. And I see it, some of the chats we're all involved in, people writing books with artificial intelligence, people writing social media with artificial intelligence. And you're like, you're just adding more noise. You're not there. You're not behind your voice. You're not bringing anything of value to the table. You're just adding more noise. And the longevity conversation is the same. The vanity, you can go and get stem cells shot into your face to make your face look. There's a place just down the road where I could go and do it. It's here. It's all here, right? But
I just want to interrupt the idea about, because I think too much of it is actually put down to the idea of us wanting to be young for the reason of looking young and being young in that way. It's about a total change of lifestyle. It's about the social change of history. It's the idea. It's not so much the 75-year-old now who tries to fight back for his youth again, but it's more like what happens for the next child that's born. The idea that from here on, this generation will do it differently. So it's about, like, the same for the environment. The environment could be different if from here on, this is what we do differently. So the same sort of...
Joe, doesn't that require a ethical framework that everybody... that it requires an ethical framework that people buy into, and society has structured an ethical framework, or at least a justice system, but not necessarily. But the ethical framework, I feel, is being flushed down the toilet for the sake of individualism, a misplaced perspective on pluralism. Inclusivity is different, but I just feel that I feel we're getting rid of the ethical system for the wrong reasons. And
okay, so think about it this way. What if when you were born, you could be inoculated against aging? That's all. So if you think about what aging is and what it leads to, so a lot of all the chronic disease, everything else, is not about beauty or whatever it is, right? People who have kidney failure or diabetes or whatever it is, right? It's because of systems that fail as they're growing older. Yeah, there's some people who just have that when they're younger, but a lot of it has to do with the fact that your body, as it gets older, just begins to fail. So this is that's just the idea of it. It's a whole imagination or reimagination, just like the idea, like if I could inoculate the world, for instance, from using fossil fuel, or if I could inoculate the world from hate, for instance. It's not about an ethical framework. It's more about what kind of a different place that would be. You know what I mean?
Okay, there's two things. One is the ethical framework allows for free will. Inoculating against hate, for example, doesn't. But I get your point on what if we could inoculate. We do. I mean, we take our kids when they're, before they go to school, they're inoculated against rubella, they're inoculated against various other, smallpox and all this sort of stuff, right? So what we're saying is we inoculate. But if we inoculate against dying from, you didn't say that, but you inoculate against disease taking out the people, and so that we live, we might end up with a Logan's Run type thing where it's, hey, you've reached the age of 40, it's now time to that was no Logan's Run. You've reached the age of 150, it's time for you to walk into the eradication room, say goodbye to everybody, hope you had a good time. Thanos would need to turn up every few years to help out.
It's a confusing one, because Joe, like, I totally get what you're saying, but the initial money, the investment, it is going to come from the beauty egotist sort of side. It is, because that's where the money, the very, very wealthy people, you look at, just what's been going on in the last decades. I remember rockets, but also bum implants. Like all of it, it's just that manipulation of ourselves to appear, and But Joe, do you want to have a final word, and then we'll finish up, because we've gone over time.
Yeah, we've gone long on a longevity show. No, I just think in terms of like most things, I encourage people to have a look at it from a different perspective than where you are currently. I think the idea is that if you are looking at things based on your own, whatever is weird to you currently is definitely going to be weird. So even if there's a new development, right? If I suddenly told you today there's a pill that's going to make you young, you will look at that from your perspective now and go like, it's kind of weird. But if you think of it from a societal change point of view, what if, when you got to 50 years old, instead of thinking like, oh, I don't have much more time at work anyway, so I don't have to worry about what happens here. I don't have to worry about the policy 50 years on, 100 years on. What if you were accountable for the next 100 years, right? People would still see you and still talk about you and still realize that, oh, you did this or whatever it is. Or when you get to 50 years old at a company and you've got some great ideas, because you've still got 40, 50 years left in you, you'd still play. You'd come forward and you'd do things, I think that there's so many people who think about the world as it is right now and go like, well, what to do? I can't change it. They go like, I don't have time to do it, right? Now imagine if you could. If the only thing that would get in the way of you doing the thing that you really thought you could was an unfortunate misstep on the side of the road where Tesla ran you down, right? I mean, it's a different perspective. So I recognize it's very hard to take yourself out of that and go like, we must want to live longer because we're vain. No, maybe we want to do more things. Maybe we want to be able to look after the world. Maybe, I don't know. And there's definitely people who would exploit this as well. I mean, there are all kinds of other things to worry about. There's still about financials as well.
Maybe it just needs a contract. If you get this treatment, what are you going to do? We'll decide. We'll have a panel of judges to decide.
Like I said, it's a fundamental rework of the way we do things. We would have to do different things. We would have to eat differently, we'd have to breathe differently, we'd have to do that. And then we'd also have to look after our money differently as well. And it's a big fundamental change. So anyway, like you said, it's too many things to talk about in one short show.
Interesting. It was good to have a chat about it because it's come up quite a lot. All right, what's keeping you guys distracted? Tim, apart from your bag.
Well, that was the longevity symbolism for the entire thing. But I did notice that it was getting... it was aging poorly, and so I needed to do something. So I bought a cheap cream. What's keeping me distracted, apart from like an 800-page theology book, which is went to China, had a fantastic time there. That was really nice. And other than that, I think that's it.
Yeah, enough distractions. Your photos from China are amazing, Joe. So Joe's on
holiday. I'm currently holding up an entire family from their dinner time. So I'm in Queensland right now, and I've been imposing myself on this family. I've been dealing with not being a trusted citizen of the world. I'm a Malaysian, so I had trouble getting a visa to come to Australia, but managed to get that done. And there's a whole thing, but we've taken too much time, so I won't spend that much time talking about that. But basically now I'm just in the middle of trying to have a holiday.
Enjoy yourself. Well, I've did I mention One Day in on our last No Show, which is a beautiful romance. If you haven't had a chance to watch it, it'll touch your heart. And the other thing I've been distracted by is I'm back into Law and Order SVU, Special Victims Unit. I don't know. I don't know why. Yeah. Particularly heinous. My husband laughs every time. So that's been keeping me distracted. Yeah, exactly. It never gets dull. But anyway, thanks everyone for joining us.
I'm also reading about Law and Order, but it's a bit different.
Great chat today. Joe, have a fantastic holiday. Thanks for calling in. Tim, really good to see you. I think you're going to be back for the next one as well.
Okay. I don't know. I can't remember what I put down in the list.
Yeah. But just really appreciate it. Always good to have a chat and just sort of catch up on everything that's going on. And thanks everyone for listening. Great number of followers, but not interaction, but really appreciate you being here. So see you in a couple of weeks. Bye.
See you around. Take care. Bye-bye.